The chamber was a rectangle of pale light and smooth metal, humming softly like a lullaby without warmth. Elias stood beside the chair, gloves tight on his hands, eyes fixed on the monitor. The little girl sat strapped in, legs too short to reach the floor. Her breathing rasped against the straps across her chest. A sterile scent of disinfectant floated in the air, sharp enough to sting. "Ready?" the attendant asked behind him, voice flat, almost polite. Elias nodded once. The hum deepened as the helmet lowered over the girl's head. Thin blue light pulsed along the cables. Lines of data scrolled on the screen, memories reducing to numbers, flashes of color, fragments of phrases. Then one froze on the monitor, glitching. "Fire eats fear but not truth." A line like a ghost in the machine. Elias's hands hovered above the console. "Proceed," the attendant said again. He pressed the command. The hum rose until it rattled his teeth. The girl's fists clenched, white-knuckled, but no sound left her lips. When it ended, silence pressed heavy on the room. The helmet lifted. She blinked slowly, eyes glassy, fixed somewhere past him. The attendant released the straps with mechanical care. Elias stepped forward, meaning to guide her up. She turned her face toward him, pale, streaked with sweat, and whispered, voice raw but steady, "They can't burn the truth." The words barely reached his ears, yet they struck like a blow. Elias froze, glove midair. The attendant didn't seem to hear. He took the girl by the arm and led her toward the door, steps echoing softly in the metal corridor. Elias stayed behind. The console still glowed faintly. That same forbidden line pulsing like an ember refusing to die. His hands trembled. Through the narrow window in the door, he saw her small figure being escorted away, head tilted toward the floor. A guard's boots clicked on the tiles, fading. The chamber hummed again as the system reset for the next treatment. Elias didn't move. The glove on his hand tightened painfully around nothing. The corridor light flickered once, a sharp buzz, and in that brief darkness, the echo of her words seemed to grow louder, curling into the sterile air like smoke. The corridor lights hummed all the way to the exit, pale and relentless. Elias walked without sound, boots pressing flat against polished tiles that smelled faintly of alcohol and metal dust. The ministry doors slid open with a sigh, spilling him into night air that tasted like ash and electric rain. The city outside pulsed with screens, every building a wall of moving faces, gentle voices promising harmony, safety, clarity. Speakers played soft music, the kind designed to erase silence, to stop thought before it began. Elias climbed the narrow stairs to his block. His keycard beeped once, green. The door opened on his unit. One room, blank walls, a wall screen waiting for commands he never gave. The air was stale, filtered too many times. He pulled off his gloves, dropped them in the sink, turned the faucet. Water ran hot, steaming. He scrubbed his hands longer than needed, watching his skin redden beneath the flow. Drops slid to the drain, carrying nothing away. On the table by the door lay his coat. He reached for it, meaning to hang it, but his fingers brushed against something stiff in the pocket. A small, torn scrap of paper, edges frayed, faintly damp. He unfolded it. 4 words scrawled in charcoal, crooked but deliberate. "They can't burn the truth." The handwriting was not a child's. It felt older, practiced, heavy with intent. The wall screen flickered to life on its own, a smiling woman in silver robes speaking warmly. "Harmony is freedom from burden. Tonight, rest easy under the ministry's care." Her voice filled the room, layered with soft static. Outside, a siren wailed, long and distant, the signal of a memory raid in another sector. The sound echoed between buildings like a low animal cry. Elias folded the paper, tight and small, and slipped it under his pillow. He switched the screen off, but the woman's words seemed to cling to the air long after the image vanished. In the dark, the sirens faded to silence. Only the hum of the city remained, like a machine dreaming. Elias lay on his side, eyes open, listening. The mattress felt cold under his palms, thin sheets rough from too many washes. the scrap of paper pressed against his hand through the pillowcase. A reminder that something had followed him home, something the system had not erased. Far below his window, boots marched past in rhythm, steel on wet pavement. A mechanical drone hovered briefly, scanning the rooftops with a red light, then glided away. Elias stared into the darkness, every muscle tense, while the words on that paper whispered silently against his skin, refusing to die out. Rain slicked the streets, thin streams of water running along the edges of the pavement, carrying scraps of paper and ash toward the drains. Elias kept his hood low as he followed the ministry coordinates to a supposed, unauthorized memory broadcast. The building was old brick, its windows dark, a relic spared from the city's smooth glass reforms. The door stood ajar, a faint glimmer of light spilling onto the wet step. No sound inside, only the distant hum of traffic and the occasional drone passing overhead. He stepped in slowly. The room smelled of dust, paper, and oil, foreign scents in a world where everything was sterilized. Shelves lined the walls, cluttered with metal boxes and faded scraps tied in bundles. On a table near the back, a lantern glowed softly, and beside it stood a woman. She was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp and alive. She didn't flinch at the sight of his uniform. She only looked at him, as if measuring whether to speak. "You're early," she said quietly, voice steady, not fearful. Elias glanced at his wrist device. There was no scheduled meeting. This wasn't an official raid. Someone had sent him here on purpose, or was watching. The woman picked up a small metal case, opened it just enough for him to see the contents. Pages, real pages, handwritten and yellowed, bound with string. The kind of thing people were erased for even touching. "They say you still remember words," she murmured, eyes never leaving his. "Real words, not the ministry's screens." Elias didn't answer. A faint drip echoed in the corner of the room. The rain outside tapped softly against the cracked window. She stepped closer, held out a single page between two fingers. On it, in thick black ink, "Memory is fire." Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, sharper this time, closer, flashing blue lights flickering faintly through the rain-soaked glass. The woman's eyes darted toward the window, then back to him. Without another word, she pressed the page into his gloved hand, warm from hers, and slipped past him toward the alley door. Her boots made no sound as she vanished into the rain. Elias stood alone in the dim room, holding the fragile sheet like something dangerous, alive. The sirens swelled louder. He tucked the page into his jacket and stepped back into the night, the wet air clinging to his skin. Across the street, a patrol drone hovered, scanning the block. He turned away before it noticed, the words on the page burning against his palm with a heat no rain could wash away. The blackout zone was different from the rest of the city. No glowing wall screens, no drones buzzing overhead, just dim lamps nailed to leaning posts and the low murmur of wind through broken fences. Elias walked with his collar up, boots crunching on gravel. Every step sounded too loud. He stopped beneath a dead street lamp. A figure waited in the shadow of an abandoned tram stop, shoulders hunched, coat worn thin. When Elias approached, the man lifted his head slowly. Cassian's face was carved by time and exhaustion, his eyes flickering with something once bright but long buried. He smelled faintly of rain and old paper. "You came alone?" Cassian's voice rasped as though unused for days. Elias nodded once. The man hesitated, then motioned toward the bench. They sat, the cold metal groaning softly under their weight. Silence stretched, heavy and brittle. Cassian's hands fidgeted with a folded scrap of cloth. When he spoke, words came haltingly, like someone forcing them through a locked door. "I used to teach history, letters, poems. I had a daughter." His brow furrowed as if searching for something lost deep inside his skull. "She had hair like..." His voice trailed off, fingers pressed to his temple. The memory refused to form. Elias stared at him, rain dripping from the tram's cracked roof, hitting the ground in irregular beats. A distant dog barked once, then silence again. Cassian's eyes shifted to Elias's uniform. "They don't burn books anymore," he whispered, voice flat but trembling underneath. "They burn people, from the inside out. Take the pages, write over them, until you don't even know what you've lost." A faint mechanical whir drifted on the night air, a patrol drone sweeping nearby. Both men froze, breath shallow, eyes on the sky beyond the ruined fence. The sound passed, fading toward the city's glowing core. Cassian looked back, lips pale. "If you can still read," he murmured, barely moving his mouth. "If you can still remember, hold it tight. They'll come for that next." Bootsteps clicked on wet pavement somewhere around the corner. Slow, deliberate. Too close. Cassian's hand twitched, pointing to the opposite alley without a word. They rose in silence. A brief nod passed between them, an unfinished thought. Then they slipped into different directions, swallowed by the broken streets. Behind them, the footsteps paused where they had been sitting. A flashlight beam cut through the mist, lingering on the empty bench. The Ministry of Clarity towered above the city like a blade driven into the earth, every window glowing white against the dark sky. Rain slid down its mirrored walls in perfect, controlled lines, as if even water obeyed here. Inside, the corridors were silent except for the soft hum of ventilation and the faint squeak of polished shoes on pristine tiles. Elias moved with the other erasers in a line toward the central briefing hall. Their black uniforms reflected the overhead lights, every crease precise, every step the same length. The hall itself was vast, white walls curving upward into a dome that swallowed sound. At the far end stood the overseer, a man in silver-gray robes, face unreadable beneath thin lenses that masked his eyes. Screens hovered around him, flickering with faces, names, data lines scrolling too fast to follow. Order 77A. The overseer's voice was calm, almost soothing, magnified by hidden speakers. Memory carriers continue to spread contamination. As of tonight, containment is no longer sufficient. Carriers are to be permanently neutralized. Erasure and disposal authorized on first contact. No one in the room moved. The hum of the ventilation deepened. A list of names appeared on the central screen, each face illuminated in harsh white light. At the top was the child from Elias's first session, her small features staring out blankly in a captured photo, number string below her name. "Immediate priority," the overseer continued, fingers gliding over the holographic display. "Subject 3-17. Repeat offenses, erase root memory, ensure final compliance." The room remained silent, only the sound of rain tapping faintly on the dome far above. Elias's hands were locked behind his back, stiff, cold even through his gloves. The child's photo stayed on the screen longer than the others, as if waiting for someone to step forward. "Your devotion keeps the city pure," the overseer said softly, a trace of warmth like manufactured kindness. "Truth is safety. Compliance is mercy." One by one, erasers filed out. Elias followed, every step echoing hollowly down the corridor. Outside the briefing hall, white lights stretched endlessly, reflections warping on the glass panels. The building seemed to watch him. He stopped at an empty intersection of hallways. Only the distant hum of drones above the ceiling broke the silence. The image of the girl's face clung to his vision, pale and still, waiting for him. A flicker passed through the lights, a brief, sharp buzz. Then everything returned to perfect brightness, as if nothing had faltered. Elias stood alone in the sterile hallway, gloves tightening around his fists, unable to move toward the exit. Night draped over the city like a heavy, wet cloth. Street lamps glowed pale through the drizzle, casting thin halos on cracked pavement. Elias walked slowly toward Sector 9, his uniform hood pulled low, boots leaving dark prints that vanished in the rain. The ministry tablet in his pocket buzzed faintly every few minutes, reminding him of the directive. Subject 317. Final erasure. He stopped in front of a narrow alley marked only by a flickering light panel. At its far end, a faded mural of a bird stretched across a wall, the paint peeling but bright beneath the grime. Drawn in chalk near the base were smaller shapes, childlike sketches of flames, A rising sun, a girl holding something that looked like a book. A faint rustle came from a doorway nearby. A boy, no older than 7, glanced out, saw the uniform, and vanished inside without a sound. The door clicked softly shut. Windows above blinked dark one by one as Elias stood there, the whole street folding in on itself, swallowing every trace of life. He reached into his coat, pulled out the ministry tablet. The girl's photo glared up at him, a cold, bureaucratic portrait tagged for deletion. His gloved thumb hovered over the confirmation icon, the action that would bring a raid, take her away for the last time. Rain pattered harder, dripping from his hood, running down the screen, blurring the child's face into shifting streaks of gray and white. Elias lowered the device slowly, breath fogging in the cool air. Behind him, a door creaked open. A woman's voice, low and cautious, spoke from the shadows. "We have nothing here. Please, just go." He didn't turn. His hands clenched around the tablet until it groaned under pressure, the glass threatening to crack. A drone's hum rose in the distance, sweeping closer, its searchlight slicing across rooftops. Elias stepped back into the alley, shoulders tense. He tapped a command on the device. Not the alert, just a blank report, filed as sector clear. The screen went dark. Somewhere, a small gasp of relief broke the silence before a door shut again, slow and careful. The street returned to stillness, broken only by rain ticking on metal and stone. Elias slipped the tablet into his coat and walked away, pace deliberate, boots splashing through shallow puddles. He didn't look back. Above, the drone paused, its beam tracing the empty alley where he had stood moments before, then drifted away toward another sector, searching for someone else to erase. Elias kept moving until the glowing towers of the ministry blurred in the distance, every step heavier, every breath edged with the weight of an order he could not follow. The entrance was barely visible, a narrow gap between 2 rusted freight containers, half hidden by piles of broken pipes. Rainwater dripped steadily from above, masking every sound except Elias's own breath. A hand emerged from the darkness inside, pale and quick. No words, just a gesture to follow. He slipped through the gap, boots scraping softly on damp concrete. The light outside faded until only a single lantern flickered ahead. The passage sloped downward, air growing cooler, the scent of metal and something else, dust, ink, time itself. At the bottom of the steps, the space opened into a cavern of shadows and quiet. Shelves cobbled from old scaffolding held bundles of paper tied with string, books with broken spines, fragments of handwriting on scraps of cloth. Dozens of them, stacked and leaning, breathing faintly in the dim glow. Lyra waited near a table, her face lit from below by the lantern flame. She didn't speak at first, just watched Elias take in the impossible sight. "This is what they tried to kill," she said finally, voice low but steady. Elias reached out slowly toward the nearest shelf. His gloved fingertips brushed the corner of a book. Real paper, soft with age, fibers rough under the leather cover. He opened it, just a little. Black letters curled across yellowed pages, irregular, imperfect, alive. "You can still read," Lyra murmured, watching him. "Most of them can't anymore. They see marks, nothing else. Years of erasures." Elias didn't answer. He turned another page carefully. The words there were sharp, burned into the surface like they refused to fade. "Truth survives in ash." Above, faintly, came the distant whir of a drone searching the streets above ground. The sound reached them like a reminder that this place was a crime simply for existing. Lyra crossed to a locked metal box, opened it, and drew out a smaller bundle. Loose sheets, handwriting smudged. She handed one to him. The letters were larger, messier, scrawled by a hurried hand. "Memory is fire. Carry it, or the world stays dark." The lantern guttered once, throwing their shadows high against the damp walls. 2 figures surrounded by silent words that seemed to wait, patient, ready to burn the silence away. No footsteps came, no alarms, only the faint heartbeat of hidden sparks waiting under the city, alive in forbidden ink. The tunnels breathed cold air, thick with damp and rust. A lantern swung from a nail above, casting shaky circles of light on the ground. Lyra moved ahead silently, boots barely touching the concrete. Elias followed, each step echoing louder than he wanted. The child trailed between them, clutching a scrap of paper like a talisman. Far above, faint and muffled, came the sound of engines. Ministry vans. The hum of drones rolled closer, joined by something heavier. Boots striking pavement in rigid unison. The sound carried through pipes and walls, dull but relentless. Lyra stopped abruptly, hand raised. She tilted her head, listening. The hum grew louder, more defined. Voices barked orders in clipped phrases they couldn't quite make out. Elias glanced back the way they'd come. Nothing but black tunnel, wet stone glistening in the dim light. "They're sweeping this sector," Lyra whispered. Her breath formed a pale cloud. 2 blocks out, maybe less. The child shifted uneasily, paper crinkling in her small hands. They moved on, quicker now, deeper into the maze. The tunnel narrowed, forcing them to walk single file. Overhead, metal pipes groaned, carrying vibrations from the world above. Wheels grinding, boots spreading out, methodical, searching. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met. Lyra crouched, pulling a metal hatch free from the floor. Below lay a cramped pit, dry and dark. She motioned for the child first, then Elias. The space was barely big enough to crouch. Elias's knees pressed to cold metal, the smell of rust and earth filling his lungs. Lyra lowered the hatch, darkness swallowing them whole. Only their quiet breaths remained. Then, from above, the sound changed. Boots on stairs. A metal door screeched open. Heavy footsteps entered the tunnel, slow and deliberate, as if the hunters already knew someone was here. Light slashed through cracks in the hatch, beams from search lamps cutting the dark into sharp white lines. A low mechanical whir joined it, a drone sensor sweeping, pausing directly overhead. "Sector unclean," a flat voice echoed, metallic and distant. "Scan deeper." Elias held his breath, every muscle locked. Beside him, the child buried her face into her knees, shaking silently. Lyra's hand found hers, fingers steady despite the tremor in the air. The footsteps lingered, pacing, stopping directly above them. Something heavy clanged against the hatch once, a dull thud that rattled Elias's teeth. Then silence. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, a curt order. "No trace. Moving on." Boots receded. The drone's hum drifted away, fading into the labyrinth above. They waited longer still, until the tunnel breathed calm again. Lyra eased the hatch open just enough to see empty passageways bathed in faint light. She let out one shallow breath. "They know someone's carrying words," she murmured, barely audible. "They won't stop now." In the quiet that followed, the paper in the child's hands seemed louder than their heartbeats, a fragile ember that had almost been crushed under boots of order. The safe house was no more than a hollowed-out utility room under the city's forgotten tram lines. Rust streaked the walls, water dripping in steady intervals from a cracked pipe. A single lantern burned on the floor, its weak flame turning their faces into shifting silhouettes. Cassian sat on a crate, shoulders hunched, hands clasped tight. His eyes stared into the dust motes floating in the air, as if trying to catch a thought before it vanished. The child knelt nearby, tracing shapes on the grimy floor with a bit of charcoal, humming softly to herself. Lyra sat against the wall, silent, her gaze fixed on the narrow doorway. Elias pulled a crumpled page from his coat and handed it to Cassian. Words, unevenly written, faded in places. "Memory survives in fire." Cassian stared at it, fingers trembling as they unfolded the scrap. For a long moment he just looked, mouth opening and closing without sound. Then, quietly, brokenly, a whisper escaped him. "Aeneas." The word seemed to linger in the air, fragile yet burning bright. His eyes widened, glistening in the dim light. He repeated it again, steadier this time, as if the name were carving a way back into him. "Aeneas, my daughter." The child stopped humming, looking up at him. Elias stayed still, watching the man clutch the paper like it was a lifeline pulled from dark waters. Cassian exhaled sharply, a sound between a sob and a laugh, rough from disuse. His hands shook as he pressed the scrap to his forehead. "I thought they'd killed her in my head forever," he rasped. But this word brought her back. Lyra's eyes softened for a moment, though her body stayed tense, listening for echoes of boots in the tunnels. The lantern flickered, throwing long, wavering shadows across the walls. Outside, faint sirens cried far above the ground, a reminder that they were never truly safe. But here, for a breath, there was something else. A small ember in the suffocating dark, a name spoken aloud, defying the silence imposed by the ministry. Cassian looked to Elias, voice raw but steady now. "If they can't take this name, maybe they can't take everything." No one answered. The room seemed to hold its breath with him, as though the city above had momentarily forgotten to hunt. The child bent back to her drawings, and this time, she traced a new word into the dust beside her chalk flames. Aeneas. Dawn came as a faint gray seep through cracks in the ceiling, turning the damp air colder. The safe house smelled of rust, old paper, and the faint smoke from the lantern that had burned through the night. Elias sat near the door, back against the wall, listening to the city breathing above them. Every creak of pipes, every drip of water felt louder than it should. The child slept, curled on a threadbare blanket, fists clutching the charcoal stub like a secret. Lyra stood by the hatch, adjusting the makeshift lock again and again. Cassian stared at the page with Aeneas' name until his eyes closed, head bowed in exhaustion. A distant vibration stirred under their feet. At first, it felt like morning traffic. Then, growing heavier, it became boots, dozens of them, synchronized, drawing closer. A second sound followed, mechanical, the whir of ministry drones sweeping low over the streets. Lyra froze, eyes cutting toward Elias. No words. They both knew. The first explosion wasn't loud, just a heavy thud as a charge tore a door somewhere above. Dust rained down through the ceiling cracks. The child woke with a small gasp, eyes wide, silent tears already streaking her face. "We have to move," Lyra hissed. She grabbed the child's hand, pushing a pack into Elias's arms. Cassian stumbled to his feet, clutching his scrap of paper like it could shield him. They slipped into the narrow tunnel at the back of the safe house, footsteps quick but soft, trying to stay ahead of the sound of boots crashing downstairs. Shouts echoed behind them, sharp, metallic through loudspeakers. "Memory carriers, surrender for cleansing. This is your final warning." The words bounced through the tunnels, cold and unyielding. They reached a rusted ladder leading up toward a maintenance hatch. Lyra climbed first, lifting the cover just an inch. Outside, early light hit her face for a moment. Then the sharp buzz of a drone's engine swept close. She shut it instantly, breath caught. "Blocked," she whispered. "They're waiting up there." Boots hammered closer now, a flood of them pouring into the tunnels. Elias glanced around. Only one other passage, narrow and dark, water pooling on the floor. No choice. They ran. The tunnel twisted, tight walls scraping their coats. Behind, a metallic hiss signaled gas canisters rolling across the ground, releasing a choking white fog that crawled toward them. The child coughed once, muffled by Lyra's coat. They stumbled into a wider chamber, only to find floodlights bursting to life above, blinding white. Figures in ministry armor surrounded the exits, weapons raised, faceless under smooth helmets. "On your knees!" a voice thundered. "Hands visible!" Elias's pulse hammered in his ears. The child clung to him, shaking. Lyra's eyes darted, searching for any crack in the circle of light, any escape, but there was none. Cassian stepped forward as if to speak, and a single warning shot cracked the air, ricocheting off stone inches from his feet. The voice came again, cold and final. "Subjects 317, 402, 691. Immediate extraction authorized." The drones descended, their red sensors sweeping over them like a death sentence already written. The first shot shattered the silence, ringing off the stone walls. Sparks danced where the bullet struck. The child screamed without sound, breath trapped in her chest. Elias grabbed her and dropped low, pulling her behind a broken support pillar as a second shot cracked the air. Lyra moved like smoke, fast and deliberate, kicking over a rusted metal drum toward the floodlights. It rolled, clattering loudly, drawing the guard's aim for a fraction of a second. She hissed, "This way!" and dove into a narrow drainage passage half hidden by rubble. Elias followed, clutching the girl against his chest, Cassian stumbling behind them. Boots thundered after, shouts and static orders ricocheting through the tunnels. A drone's red beam sliced past Elias's shoulder, searing the dark. The passage twisted, dripping water onto their heads, walls slick with grime. The ground sloped sharply down, forcing them to half-slide, splashing through stagnant pools. Behind, the echo of pursuit never faltered. Heavy, mechanical, relentless. They reached a junction where two tunnels split. Lyra paused, chest heaving, eyes flicking between the paths. Distant footsteps closed in from both sides. For a breath, they were trapped. Then Elias spotted a maintenance ladder leading upward, its rungs corroded but intact. He shoved the child toward it. Lyra climbed first, pulling the hatch above with all her weight until it screeched open. Cold air and faint daylight spilled down, mixing with the damp tunnel stink. One by one they scrambled up, Elias last, dragging the hatch shut just as the first drone whirred into view below. They emerged into a skeletal construction site. Half-built structures of rusted steel, tarps flapping in the wind. Empty cranes loomed overhead like frozen giants. The city skyline blurred in morning fog, distant sirens rising and falling. "Move!" Lyra whispered, voice raw. They darted between stacks of concrete blocks, boots sinking in mud, breath sharp in their lungs. Somewhere behind them, a drone's hum grew louder again. It had followed their trail up. A searchlight swept across the site, painting everything white for an instant before swinging away. They reached a skeletal stairwell leading down to the street below. Elias glanced back. Two armored figures had climbed out of the hatch, scanning with rifles raised. No time left. They half ran, half fell down the stairs, slipping on wet metal, catching themselves on rusted rails. At the bottom, they dashed into a maze of alleys, the child clutching Elias's coat, feet barely touching the ground. Shouts followed, growing distant, then closer again as if the city itself betrayed every step they took. Dogs barked somewhere far off. A drone passed low overhead, searching, its beam slicing the mist just a heartbeat too late to catch them. Only when they dove into another drain tunnel, breath ragged, clothes soaked in mud, did silence return. Elias held the child close, heart hammering like a drum in his ears. Lyra crouched near the entrance, gun in hand now, watching the alley beyond with eyes wide and unblinking. The quiet wasn't safety, only a pause, fragile and trembling, before the hunt resumed. Night pressed heavy on the outskirts of the city, where street lamps flickered irregularly and the hum of drones rarely passed. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the alleys damp, every puddle a mirror for neon glows far away. Elias followed close behind Lyra, the child between them, Cassian limping, paper clenched in his fist. They stopped near a rusted gate, its lock long broken. A man waited in the shadow of a crumbling warehouse wall. His uniform was civilian gray, a jacket pulled tight, hood drawn low. When he stepped forward, the faint light revealed Simon's face. Older now, lined with exhaustion, but familiar. Elias hadn't seen him since their days in training, before the ministry hardened them into machines. "You're late," Simon said softly, eyes darting to the rooftops as if the air itself might betray them. "They're sweeping hard tonight." Lyra studied him silently, body angled between him and the child. Elias's hand tightened on her shoulder in warning, but Simon only sighed. "There's a passage out of this sector. A friend owes me. You'll be invisible past the western line, but we need to move." Cassian leaned against the wall, breath ragged. "If this is a trick..." Simon's gaze flicked to him, tired, but sharp. "It's not. I don't erase old friends." The group followed him through a series of narrow streets where the lights barely worked. Every few steps Simon stopped, listening, checking corners before waving them forward. They reached a fenced courtyard, a broken delivery truck rusting in its center. A metal door stood ahead, unmarked, supposedly leading to the tunnel network. Simon placed his hand on the scanner. The lock clicked open with a soft hiss. Downstairs, he whispered. Stay quiet. We'll wait until the next drone pass before moving on. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and oil. A faint hum pulsed below, deeper than the distant city noise. Elias descended last, glancing over his shoulder. The alley above seemed empty, but his stomach tightened with unease. The basement was wider than expected, a storage area stripped bare except for a few crates and a single lamp on a metal table. Its light painted everything yellow and tired. Simon closed the door behind them, bolting it. Wait here, he said, voice low. I'll signal when it's safe. Minutes passed. Too quiet. The hum grew louder, mechanical, deliberate. Cassian's breath quickened, hands shaking on his scrap of paper. The child clung to Lyra, eyes wide. Then came the sharp click of a second door opening. Not the one they'd entered. Heavy boots, multiple pairs, moved in sync. Floodlights snapped on, harsh white slicing the shadows. Figures in ministry armor filled the space like a tide. Subjects acquired, a metallic voice announced. Proceed with extraction. Simon didn't look at them. He stood near the lamp, head lowered, hands clenched in his pockets. No words, no apology, just silence as the circle of light closed in. The transport van hummed softly, its metal walls closing in like a coffin. No windows. Only the steady vibration of the engine and the occasional static burst from the comms unit in the front cabin. Elias sat shackled beside Lyra, wrists locked in magnetic cuffs. Across from them, Cassian stared at the floor, his paper gone, eyes empty. The child curled against Elias's side, trembling soundlessly. The van slowed. A faint hydraulic hiss. The doors opened, spilling harsh white light inside. Armed guards gestured sharply, no words. They were marched down a narrow corridor where the air smelled of bleach and ozone, every step echoing too loud on the sterile floor. The hall opened into a cavernous chamber filled with machines humming in perfect rhythm. Dozens of chairs lined the room, each one occupied. People sat strapped upright, eyes glassy, helmets covering their heads. Thin streams of light pulsed from the machines into their skulls, projecting flashes onto screens above. Smiling faces, fabricated memories playing on endless loops. A worker in gray moved between rows, adjusting settings, checking vitals, as if tending a garden of ghosts. Some of the subjects sobbed quietly, others sat slack, their breaths shallow. The hum was constant, low and heavy, vibrating in Elias's ribs. One chair near the far wall was empty. Its helmet hung open, cables coiled like snakes around its arms. A small placard above it displayed a cold designation. 317, the girl's number. The metal restraints gleamed under the sterile lights, waiting. A technician approached, tablet in hand. 2 new intakes, he said flatly, pointing toward Elias and Cassian. Priority sequence, memory overwrite and compliance script upload. Prep the child separately. Overseer's order. Lyra lunged once, fury breaking through the numbness, but a guard slammed her against the wall, the sound of impact dull against the padding. The child whimpered but made no sound beyond that. Elias looked at the rows of seats. A woman across the aisle stared back at him through the helmet's visor, eyes full of tears she couldn't wipe away, mouth forming silent words he couldn't read before the machine pulsed again and her expression smoothed into a blank smile. Cassian's knees buckled. The guards dragged him toward an empty chair, strapping him in, tightening restraints until his veins bulged. A helmet descended over his head with a soft hiss. Screens lit up above him, filling with images of a life he had never lived. A happy family, quiet compliance, a world without pain because there was no truth. The hum grew louder, a bass note filling the chamber like a heartbeat out of sync with their own. A technician gestured toward the chair labeled 3-17, voice clinical, detached. Bring the subject. The child's hand clung desperately to Elias's sleeve, small fingers digging into fabric. He tightened his grip around her instinctively, knowing it was useless against the weight of this place. For the first time since they entered, Elias spoke, his voice low but cutting through the drone of machines. You're not putting her in that chair. The guards turned as one, faceless helmets reflecting the stark white light, rifles raising with mechanical precision. The hum of the forge didn't falter. Dozens of screens kept playing their soft, perfect lies. The holding block smelled of metal and damp cloth, like a hospital left to rot. Rows of narrow cells lined the corridor, each one nothing more than a concrete bench, a drain in the corner, and a faint blue light humming overhead. Elias sat on the floor, wrists locked in cuffs, the child beside him, silent and shaking. Across the hall, Cassian hunched forward on the bench, chains clinking softly when he moved, eyes fixed on the ground. Lyra occupied the farthest cell. Her face was pale under the blue light, hair falling loose over her shoulders. A thin cut traced her cheekbone where the guards had slammed her into the wall earlier, blood dried dark against her skin. She sat cross-legged, back straight, lips moving silently for a moment before words slipped out, barely audible. Fire survives in whispers. Fire survives in whispers. Elias lifted his head slightly. The words seemed to pulse in the quiet corridor, fragile but alive, a thread connecting the cells. Cassian shifted, breath shaky. "Say it again," he rasped, voice broken from hours of silence. Lyra's eyes met his through the bars. This time her voice steadied, still low but clearer, carrying to every corner of the block. "Memory is fire. Carry it, or the world stays dark." From a nearby cell, another prisoner stirred. A gaunt woman with hollow eyes. Her lips trembled, echoing the line like a prayer long forgotten. Someone else joined, then another, soft voices weaving together in the oppressive stillness. The child pressed closer to Elias, clutching his sleeve. Her tiny voice added itself to the quiet chorus, shaky but determined. "Fire survives. Fire survives." Boots clanged on the steel walkway. A guard passed by, visor glinting under the sterile light. He stopped, scanning the cells. The murmurs died instantly, every voice cut off. The guard stared a moment longer, faceless and still, before moving on, heavy steps fading down the hall. Silence fell again, but it was different now. Thicker, charged. The words they dared to speak lingered in the air, refusing to die even in chains. Elias reached for the child's hand, cold and small in his cuffed fingers. Lyra looked at them both from across the corridor, her eyes fierce despite exhaustion. She mouthed one word soundlessly but clear. "Tomorrow." Far down the hall, a door hissed open. A technician's voice, flat and clinical, announced, "Subjects 4-02 and 3-17. Prepare for overwrite cycle at first light." The cell locks clicked, one by one, mechanical and inevitable. Yet above that sound, in the breaths they shared, the spark of their whispers still glowed faintly, refusing to be stamped out. The lights never went out in the holding block. A sterile glow seeped through the bars, flat and endless, making time feel like a long, unbroken line. Elias sat on the floor, back to the wall, wrists still cuffed. The child dozed fitfully beside him, every so often twitching awake as if chased in dreams. Cassian sat opposite, eyes fixed on the ceiling. He hadn't spoken since they were thrown back into the cell. Lyra leaned against the bars between them, her face shadowed, whispering to herself fragments of the lines they'd shared the night before. A mechanical hiss broke the silence as a drone slid past outside the corridor, its red sensor sweeping over each cell. When it moved on, Cassian finally shifted, voice hoarse, almost inaudible. "It's not erasure." Elias looked at him, a faint frown creasing his brow. Cassian's hands tightened into fists, the chain of his cuffs rattling softly. "They don't delete you. They overwrite you." He swallowed hard, eyes wet but burning. "Everything you are, they flood it with stories they want. You walk out smiling, believing a life that never happened. And the real one," his voice broke, "the real one burns to ash inside you." Lyra's breath caught audibly, a sharp sound in the stillness. She moved closer, knuckles white as she gripped the bars. "You've seen it?" Cassian nodded slowly, gaze far away, words dragging out of him like something heavy and old. They took me 3 times. Each time I came back a stranger to my own skin. My daughter. He hesitated, jaw trembling. I almost forgot she ever existed. If you hadn't shown me her name. The child stirred, opening bleary eyes, confused by the rawness in his voice. Elias put a hand on her shoulder, grounding her silently. Cassian leaned forward, desperate now, whisper sharp but low. There are thousands out there. Thousands, living lives that aren't theirs, walking, breathing lies, thinking they're safe because they don't remember truth anymore. Lyra's jaw tightened, eyes glistening in the cold light. Her whisper came harsh, a promise. We burn their machines to the ground. Bootsteps echoed down the hall, closer this time. A guard passed, stopping for a heartbeat at their cell. The conversation died instantly, swallowed by silence. The visor tilted, scanning them, then moved on. Cassian exhaled slowly, trembling, a sound that was neither sob nor breath. You asked what's worse than forgetting, he whispered once the steps faded. It's remembering just enough to know you've been rewritten. The blue light above flickered once before steadying again, leaving every word hanging heavy in the still, stale air. The truth, now spoken, felt like a weight pressing on all of them, impossible to lift, impossible to unhear. The siren started low, more a vibration than a sound, pulsing through the walls. The blue light in the block turned crimson, washing every surface in a dull, warning glow. Locks clanged open in sequence, one cell after another, metal on metal, sharp and final. 2 guards entered, rifles low but ready, visors blank. Subjects 4-02 and 3-17, one of them announced flatly. Transfer to overwrite chamber. Cassian stiffened on the bench. The child's fingers dug into Elias's sleeve. Lyra slowly rose to her feet, eyes flicking toward Elias for only a fraction of a second. Something passed between them. No words, just a silent, sharp decision. The first guard stepped closer, unlocking the cuffs on Cassian just enough to pull him up. As he turned, Lyra moved. A sudden snap of her chain, a kick low and fast, the sound of bone giving under the blow. The guard crumpled without a cry. The second reached for his rifle, but Elias lunged forward, slamming his shoulder into the man's chest, driving him against the bars. The weapon clattered to the ground, sliding under the bench. The child didn't move, frozen, wide-eyed, breath shallow. Cassian grabbed the fallen rifle with trembling hands, fumbling before finding the grip. Alarms shrieked now, louder, filling the hall with mechanical panic. More boots pounded somewhere above, rushing closer. The prisoners in nearby cells screamed and begged, some reaching through the bars, others just staring with empty eyes. This way, Lyra hissed, dragging the child toward the corridor. Elias followed, blood hammering in his ears, the stolen rifle heavy in his hands. Cassian staggered after them, clutching it like a lifeline. They ran down a narrow service passage, red lights strobing overhead. Every few meters another locked door stood in their path. Lyra pulled a small device from her boot. A rough EMP charge, homemade, its casing scorched from earlier use. She slapped it on the first lock. A short, sharp hum, a flash. The door hissed open. Beyond, the ministry's main hall stretched vast and gleaming, rows of terminals lining the walls, screens showing the rewrites in progress, people strapped in chairs, lives burned and rewritten in cold light. Guards scrambled toward alarms, shouting commands. No one noticed them for a single breath. The cores at the far end, Lyra muttered, barely a whisper, already moving. They darted between consoles, alarms screaming, flashes of fabricated smiles flickering above them. At the base of the central column, the heart of the forge, cables as thick as a man's arm, ran into a control hub. Heat radiated from it, steady and oppressive. Elias crouched, setting the EMP charge where the cables converged. His hands shook, but movements were precise. Cassian held the rifle awkwardly, aiming at nothing, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Footsteps thundered closer. Voices barked orders, growing louder. Lyra crouched beside Elias, whisper sharp, "Now or never." He twisted the device's dial, a faint whine rising. They dove for cover as the charge detonated with a soundless flash, followed by a deep, gut-punch thrum. The lights flickered. The hum of the forge stuttered, screens going black, machines groaning in protest. Then came the screams. From every chamber, every corridor, a rising tide of voices, confused, terrified, broken memories bleeding back through forced layers of lies. Some screamed names, some just wailed. Others fell silent, collapsing under the weight of truth crashing in. Smoke rolled through the hall, acrid and metallic. A sprinkler pipe burst overhead, showering them in cold water as alarms roared. In the chaos, Elias grabbed the child, Lyra pulling Cassian along, their boots splashing through spreading puddles of water and blood. Behind them, the forge convulsed with dying energy, lights flickering like the last breaths of a beast that had fed on memories too long. Morning crept in like smoke, gray and heavy, clinging to every surface of the city. The sirens had stopped hours ago, leaving behind a silence that felt wrong, stretched thin over streets that never used to be quiet. Elias, Lyra, Cassian, and the child moved through alleyways littered with fragments of screens blown out by the EMP, glass glinting like frost under the weak sun. People staggered in the open, barefoot, in torn uniforms, hospital gowns, or civilian clothes that didn't seem to fit. They wandered without purpose, clutching their heads, staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Some muttered names over and over, voices cracked and unsure. Others sat on the curb, rocking slowly, tears carving paths through grime on their faces. From an apartment window, a woman screamed, a sound raw and unending. A man ran past them barefoot, clutching a photo, crying out for someone who didn't answer. Two children stood in the middle of the street, holding each other, wide-eyed, whispering different names for the same face they couldn't remember fully. "We broke it," Cassian rasped. His voice trembled, guilt and awe tangled in every syllable. "But look at them." Elias scanned the faces around them, hollow eyes flickering with pain, confusion, fragments of stolen lives bleeding back into reality. There was no relief in this awakening, only the weight of everything that had been taken returning all at once. They passed a plaza where a massive ministry broadcast screen had frozen mid-message. Static bled across the smiling face of an overseer, its perfect expression cracked by black lines. Beneath it, a crowd gathered, murmuring uncertainly. Some screamed at the screen, hurling debris. Others just stared, hands over their ears, as if truth itself hurt too much to hear. Lyra guided them into the shadow of a collapsed tram station, pausing to watch the chaos unfold. "We gave them back their fire," she whispered, voice brittle. "Now they're burning." In the distance, smoke curled from the ministry tower where the forge had stood, rising slow and steady into the pale sky. Drones hovered erratically, lights flickering, unable to coordinate, some dropping from the air like broken insects. The child clutched Elias's hand tighter, whispering faintly, "They're scared." He looked down at her. She didn't mean the soldiers or the ministry. She meant everyone. The city itself shuddered with fear, alive in agony, like a body waking from anesthesia, only to find the wounds still open. Far away, faintly, voices began to chant scraps of forbidden words, rough and shaky, passing from mouth to mouth in alleys and doorways. Not harmony, not order, just human noise trying to stitch truth back together from ash. The group moved on, silent, each step heavy with the weight of a world where memories had finally been returned. Jagged, bleeding, impossible to hold without pain. The old power station stood like a carcass at the city's edge, half collapsed, its steel frame groaning in the wind. Inside, the last ministry core pulsed faint blue in the dark, cables snaking across the floor like veins feeding a heart that refused to die. The hum was steady, mechanical, but under it, something felt alive. A whispering presence. 1,000 voices trapped inside, waiting. Elias stood at the control platform, mud drying on his boots, rifle slung uselessly at his back. In his hands was the detonator, a small black device, heavy not from weight, but from what it meant. One press, and the failsafe charge would blow the core apart, releasing every sealed memory the Ministry still held. Every erased life, every overwritten story, all flooding back into the minds of those who'd been cleansed. Lyra stood near the entrance, eyes flicking to the shattered skyline beyond the station. The city groaned with chaos out there. Sirens, sobbing, fragments of truth breaking people apart as they struggled to breathe under the weight of what had been stolen. Cassian crouched by the wall, head in his hands, murmuring Anais' name over and over like an anchor. The child stood at Elias's side, small fingers gripping his coat sleeve, silent, eyes wide. "If you do this," Lyra said quietly, breaking the hum, "there's no going back. Some of them, they won't survive it." Elias glanced at the core. Lights ran across its surface, each pulse like a heartbeat counting down to a decision. The screen above it flickered with faint faces. Strangers, children, old men, women, all still rewritten, still smiling false smiles. Cassian lifted his head, voice raw and shaking. "We already opened one wound. This will tear the rest wide." The child tugged on Elias's sleeve. Her voice was barely a breath, but it cut through everything else. Truth or silence? The words settled like ash in the air, soft but impossible to ignore. The detonator felt heavier in his palm. A single press would give back everything, the pain, the grief, the stolen fires, but would also drown the city in agony it might never rise from. Leaving the core intact meant the Ministry's last lie would stand forever, a fragile cage around broken minds. Elias stared at the button, knuckles white. No speeches. No clear right answer. Only the hum of trapped lives and the child's question hanging between them like smoke. He raised the detonator slowly, thumb hovering over the trigger, his breath trembling in his chest. The station seemed to hold its breath with him, a city waiting to be damned or reborn in flames. The click of the detonator was almost silent, lost in the low hum of the core. But the reaction was instant. A blinding pulse of white surged through the cables, racing into the heart of the city like fire through dry grass. For a heartbeat, there was no sound. Then, from every direction, a chorus of screams, gasps, sobs, a tidal wave of human voices breaking free all at once. The ground trembled underfoot. Lights exploded in the distance. Drones plummeted like dead insects. Buildings flickered as their broadcast screens shattered into static. Elias stood frozen on the platform, the detonator slipping from his hand. The core cracked open, blue light spilling out like liquid fire, burning the darkness with memories too heavy to contain. Faces flashed in the air around them. Strangers, children, lovers, all stitched together in fragments of lives stolen long ago. Cassian dropped to his knees, clutching his head, whispering Anais over and over between sobs that shook his entire body. Lyra pressed a hand against the wall to stay upright, breath ragged, tears cutting through the dirt on her cheeks as visions poured back. People she'd lost, names she hadn't dared to keep alive. Outside, the city erupted. Some collapsed where they stood, overwhelmed by floods of grief, pain, love long forgotten. Others screamed, clawing at walls, at themselves, as alien memories crashed into their minds. Truth they had never been allowed to hold. Fires started where riots spilled into the streets. Vehicles burned. Sirens failed to rise over the sheer noise of human agony. The child stood silent in the storm, face pale, watching the sky tear itself open. For a moment, her eyes glowed with reflections of countless lives rushing back all at once. A single tear slid down her cheek, but she did not cry out. Instead, she whispered something only Elias caught. "They'll hurt first, but they'll be alive." The air smelled of smoke and rain, metal and electricity. The city burned not from bombs or flames, but from memory itself. A wildfire of truth that couldn't be contained anymore. Above the skyline, black plumes rose where the Ministry towers once glowed. In the chaos, someone began painting on a wall, hands shaking but determined. A crude, fiery bird took shape, wings wide, rising from ash. Elias watched the first stroke of red smear across gray concrete. The world around them was broken, screaming, bleeding, but not silent anymore. Lyra stepped beside him, voice low and hoarse. This is only the beginning. The city howled, torn apart yet breathing for the first time in decades, firelight flickering like the heartbeat of something new trying to be born. Dawn crept over the city like a slow breath, pale and uncertain. Smoke still hung in the air, curling in low clouds above broken towers. Streets lay in ruin, shattered screens, overturned vehicles, scorch marks on walls where fire had licked and faded. The silence that followed the night's chaos was strange, heavy, filled with soft sobs and the distant murmur of human voices trying to remember how to speak truth again. Elias sat near the remnants of a burned-out tram stop, mud and ash coating his boots. The detonator lay on the ground beside him, lifeless now, just another scrap of plastic and metal. His hands were scratched, his face hollow, but his eyes stayed fixed on the city slowly stirring around them. Lyra crouched nearby, wrapping a torn blanket around the child. The girl leaned against her shoulder, exhausted but awake, eyes wide and alert as if afraid to blink in case this fragile morning vanished. Cassian sat apart, legs drawn to his chest, whispering Aeneas like a fragile thread holding him together. His voice cracked but didn't stop, as if each repetition stitched something back into place. Around them, survivors gathered in small clusters. Some held hands. Others stared at photographs clutched to their chests, names spilling from their lips in disbelief or grief. A man knelt on the pavement, sobbing into his palms, repeating the same word over and over, mother. Two women embraced without speaking, their bodies shaking with a mixture of sorrow and relief. Someone found a fragment of paper, charred at the edges, and began reading aloud. The words were faint, barely legible, but people turned toward the sound, listening, leaning in like flowers seeking light. A few more joined, voices trembling but clear, reciting scraps of old poems, pieces of truths once buried. The city that had lived in silence for so long began to murmur again. Elias looked to the child. She met his gaze and whispered, barely audible, "It hurts, but it's real now." He reached out, brushing ash from her hair, nodding once, no words to offer. In the distance, on the blackened wall of a collapsed ministry outpost, someone had painted a bird with wide, rising wings, red and gold against the gray ruin. A phoenix, crude but fierce, glowing faintly in the first light of morning. The fires still smoldered. The streets still cried. Nothing had been fixed, nothing healed, but life moved through the pain, fragile and stubborn, refusing to be silenced again. Elias stood slowly, looking over the city, broken, burning, breathing. The air tasted of smoke and memory, sharp and bitter but alive. "We remember now," Lyra said quietly behind him. "Not as hope, not as comfort, but as truth." And for the first time, the truth didn't burn to ash. It stayed,